Hi there, folks. Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight Show. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand. With me on the show today, I have Mondo Gonzales for the second or third time. It's been a little while, but it's great to have you back on the show, Mondo.
Good to be here. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, it is nice to catch up again. We first met in Auckland, and which was really, really nice. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed our catch up there. And then I think you've been on the show once since then, so this will be the next one. And I guess the subject that we're planning to cover today is one of those can of worms ones where people will, either love it or hate it. But what I'm hoping is that people will actually listen to it without bias and, preconceived ideas, and just actually weigh things up, as they are. So having said that, I'll let you kick us off there, Mondo.
Yeah, well, I just will let everybody know that we plan on coming back to Auckland next May.
Awesome.
May of 2025. So we have a few of us will be back again. So that'll be a great time to see everybody there. We loved. I can honestly say that New Zealand is my favorite place in the whole world. Primarily the South Island, but it really is a stunning place. So I'm excited to go back and participate. But one of the things that I've been talking about lately is giving a couple presentations on the subject of the nation of Israel, because my undergrad, it was in Jewish studies. So I'm very familiar with, Jewish writings, Jewish history, rabbinic writings, theology, stuff like that. And one of the things that I think is helpful is in trying to help people to come to especially if you're a Christian, to come to an understanding of what's our theology of Israel as a New Testament Christian? Because what I have seen in the church is you have really two polar opposites. There's a polarization that's happening in almost every area of thought today. Certainly politics and theology and everything else. But one side of that is you have certain people who, again, are believers in Jesus, who are out preaching the gospel, and they take a very negative view of Israel. They will look at Israel and see, at least from a practical perspective, they'll seek to boycott Israel, the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions side. They also theologically will look that there's no future for national Israel. They'll go as far as saying that the modern state of Israel is filled with not real Jews, Khazars, and I've discussed that quite a bit. I think that's an error. But if people go to prophecywatchers.com/Jews, there are several articles and things related to that topic, even to the idea that, the idea of Israel, Hebrew, and Jew are all different. And that's not true either. So I did a full examination of every time it appears in the Bible to show that they are synonyms. So you have that side of it, and a lot of it is maybe theologically replacement theology, or where, again, the church is here now, so these Jews are not there. So you have that side of it, which again is can be very hostile, even sometimes to the point of being anti-Semitic. Yeah. But on the other side, you have those that I think they support Israel, and sometimes with a blind eye, as the church will. They will be very reluctant to criticize anything that national Israel might do or the state of Israel might do today. They also will come to the point where theologically they will not criticize Israel, or they will not evangelize Israel. When in fact we know that Israel needs Jesus. Yes. Jesus is the Messiah. Yeah. Apart from Jesus, there's no salvation. And so many of these groups will develop even what they call a dual new covenant theology. Well, there's a new covenant theology for the church, and there's a new covenant theology for Israel. So just leave them alone. They don't need to be evangelized, which is not true.
No, I agree.
Paul said in Romans 10, he desired for them to be saved, which means that they're not. They don't get an automatic entrance into the kingdom apart from Jesus. There is no salvation apart from the Lord Jesus for anybody.
Yeah.
And then I think the final thing too is it leads to a lack of evangelism to Jewish people because they think they're already saved, or even a lack of recognition that many segments of the state of Israel, especially the religious segment, they'll persecute Christians. And so there is this kind of, you're like, well, how do we have a balance here in the sense of what a balanced Christian perspective is? And I think it comes in the middle that we do support Israel. We support Israel in the sense of, this is the question I asked. There's two questions, and I'll kind of close it off here and we can segue, but does Israel belong in the land today? And the answer is yes, unequivocally. They belong in the land because of the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of the physical descendants. But the second question I like to ask is, does Israel deserve to be in the land? And the answer is no, of course they don't. So the answer, we don't even have to guess on this, is Deuteronomy chapter 9. Here's Moses writing to them. He's on the Mount of Nebo. They're getting ready to go over the Jordan into the promised land. And God reminds them through Moses, hey, look, when you get into this land, don't say to yourself, it's because we're righteous. Because he says, in fact, you're a stubborn, stiff-necked group, and you've rebelled against me over and over. So and he says it like 3 or 4 times, do not say it's because you're righteous. And so they never deserved to be in the land. They don't deserve to be in the land now. But God gave them the land. They belong in the land because of his promises. So when people ask me, do you support Israel? Of course, I support Israel's right to be in the land because of the promises that God made it. But I will not be bound to not criticize them if they are worthy of criticism, which again, we can talk about some of those things. And their spiritual state it has a lot to be desired if we're honest, and we need to be honest.
Well, I mean, yeah, you get some people that will say, "Well, this isn't the real Israel, and these are not the real Jews, and all that, and it's Satan's deception." But there is nowhere in Scripture that says there's going to be a false Israel set up before the real one. So, I mean, you cannot find that anywhere in Scripture.
And DNA genetics show it to be false.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right about what you're saying about they don't deserve it. Yes, they're secular, they're sinful, they're like really, I shake my head at a lot of what they do. But you look at Ezekiel chapter 36 to 39, and I think it's in 36 basically, where, you can see that God's saying it's not because of their righteousness, it's for his name's sake that they return to the land. And then at the end, they will look on him whom they've pierced, obviously. They'll realize that they've been looking for the wrong Messiah. They've rejected the right one. But that doesn't take away from the fact that God's put them in there for that such as a time as this. But it doesn't mean we support all the things they do. And personally, I don't trust politicians in any country. And I don't care whether they're in New Zealand or the US or Israel, They are beholden to these days the world government move, I think, and I don't think it matters which country they're in. So that's how I see it.
It's very true. I mean, when there's a standard that sometimes, again, we could get sucked into, again, not clarifying with precision that balanced approach of saying, hey, again, we have to be able to criticize and again, speak truth. We're truth tellers as Christians. Yeah. And so we recognize the limitations, but also to balance it out that we're not here to say that Israel doesn't have a place. Some people would say that even the miracle of modern Israel in 1948 is the state of Israel is no more miraculous or important than the establishment of the state of Zimbabwe. And you're like, see, that's false. Yeah. We as you mentioned in Ezekiel 36, Ezekiel 38, 39, even 37, that all those chapters speak where God says, I'm going to bring him back. And they're going to come, even like the war of the Ezekiel war that's coming with whatever that might look like with Gog and Magog and those players. God said, you're going to come against a land that was desolate for a long time, but now it's been rebuilt as I've gathered my people from all the countries. So this is what I say is, regardless of what some people might claim about the people that are there right now, God says the people that are there are the ones that he gathered. I think he knows who to gather back. Yeah. And so you have a variety of ways, genetic studies, again, looking at linguistics, even the Hebrew words, the terms, but also to know that God says, I gathered them back. So again, he knows on the mountains of Israel, which is where that future war. But the second thing, which is important, is in Ezekiel 36, you see a gap in verse 24 into 25. He gathers them back in unbelief. And then it's not till verse 25 that they get filled with the Spirit. But what happens is people sometimes miss that there could be 2,000 years between one verse and the next. Or in this case, we have at least 75, 80 years of we don't know when their salvation is going to take place. But Romans 11:26, it does say that at the time of the end, all Israel will be saved. They will. And it's not all Israel in the past. It's all Israel in that generation will come to salvation, but not on their own. They're going to come to salvation in faith in the Lord Jesus, which you quoted, Zechariah 12:10. They will look upon him whom they've pierced, and they'll mourn. So we have these passages, and if we recognize that in Ezekiel 36, they come in unbelief, and then something happens 75, 80 years, 90 years later, whatever that time will end up being, they get saved and he fills them with the Spirit. So they are gathered in unbelief for the purpose of the tribulation period, this 70th week of Daniel, however that comes to look like. But God's like, no, I'm going to fulfill all my promises here. And so they're back in the land. They're in unbelief. Let's remember, as you mentioned, 80% of Israel is secular. I mean, Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the Middle East.
Yeah.
So they certainly are not projecting the ethics of the Torah, the ethics of the Old Testament right now. And so we don't defend that
and
at all.
And of course, they've supplanted a lot of that with the Talmud. So even when they talk about the Torah, more often than not, they're talking about the Talmud and the rabbi's interpretation of it. So this is, they're way off track with the whole Kabbalah thing and all of that. And I think anybody that supports that as a Christian is nuts. But, we have to be real. This is where they're at. The religious Jews, just like they were in Jesus' time, it was them that persecuted and ultimately had Jesus crucified, and all the apostles and whatnot, So we don't have to support that, and it doesn't mean we support them building a third temple. They're looking for their Messiah, who I believe will turn out to be the Antichrist initially, and
Yep.
And then it's through that tribulation and having made terrible mistakes, I think, that they will realize, my gosh, we got this wrong.
We got duped. We got duped by this guy, because that's the interesting thing is in John 5:43, Jesus says, I've come in my Father's name, as Messiah for sure, and you didn't receive me. Another's going to come in his own name as Messiah. The parallelism is perfect, and him you will receive. So the fact of the matter is, when you look at this, they believe most likely this Antichrist figure is the Messiah, because you see in Daniel 9:27 that he makes a covenant with the Jews there for a week. And the phraseology there, and I encourage people to do their own research, but if you look at the word berit, the word covenant in the book of Daniel, it appears 4 or 5 times. It always refers to the Mosaic covenant. So people often think that, he's going to make a peace agreement or some secular. I don't think that's what it's saying.
No.
If you look in the context, he is going to cause the Mosaic covenant to prevail in the land. That's what the Hebrew word means, to prevail. And so when he does that, which is going to include the third temple, I think for sure, because that's what the Mosaic covenant is ritual worship through sacrifices, which is the context, because the next verse, in the middle of the week, he'll cause the sacrifices to stop. But when this happens, if you think about Jewish rabbinic theology today, and you say, tell us about the Messiah, what is one of the key components that he's going to do? They're going to go, he's going to observe Torah. He's going to help us do Torah. And when this happens, when this third temple gets supported and defended and affected, they're going to eat it right up. This is our guy. This is exactly what we believe. It's what the rabbinic theology says. It's what all the Talmudic and their tradition says. The Messiah is going to be pro-Torah. When this happens, they're going to be like, this is our guy. And then, as we know, the consistent thing about rabbinic theology is this. one of the reasons that they rejected Jesus, especially for the rabbis later, first, second century, third century, is that they do not accept a Messiah who is divine, who is deity. There's no God-man for them. So when they accept this future messianic figure, which we know as the Antichrist, they're going to accept him. They're going to believe it. He's going to promote Torah. It's going to be great for 3.5 years. And then in the middle of the week, in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, he goes into the temple, stops the worship, declares himself to be God-man. And they, into their consistency, they're going to go, we reject you. The Messiah is not God. And so in their rejection of him, they're going to realize this guy tricked us. And then he's going to go after them to kill him and persecute him for the last half of the tribulation. So again, this is where their Daniel 12:7, the angel tells Daniel, God, during that last half, God is going to shatter the power of the holy people. And they are going to get persecuted. And this is why in their distress, Hosea 5:15, the Messiah, which is Jesus talking, he says, I'm going to go return to my place up in heaven until they acknowledge their offense. And in their distress, they will earnestly seek me. That's what we see really the goal of the tribulation period.
That sounds pretty balanced. Yeah. And so it is entirely possible to be on board with the fact that the state of Israel today is imperfect. I don't necessarily support them politically. I don't support a lot of what they do, but I do believe that they're in the land because God put them there for such a time as this and what's coming. And it's not going to be a pretty picture. There will, like you say, be persecution and war and people coming against them and hatred, and it's going to be a terrible time. Not terrible, not a good one, and they're looking for a Messiah it's going to be good for them, but what they're going to get first isn't going to be good for them at all.
I mean, Mark 13:19 in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus says that, this is the worst time in the history of all of creation.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing statement. And of course, that's going to be, there's going to be certainly a lot of it directed at Israel, but it's going to be worldwide, right? It's the Great Tribulation. It's the Book of Revelation. It's all these 4 billion people are dying, and so it is coming. Revelation 3:10 to test those who dwell on the earth. You see the same thing in Luke 21, where Jesus says this is going to come upon the whole earth as a snare, as a trap. This time of judgment that is so bad. But Israel, we know that Zechariah 13:8. That 2/3 of Israel perishes during this time. 1/3 gets refined, and they're the ones that come out at the end. But this is going to be one 7-year-long conversation that God is going to have with them, and it's going to primarily revolve around what they say about Jesus, their Messiah. It's going to take 7 years, but in their distress, they're going to seek him. And they're going to finally realize at the end, what have we done? We've killed our own Messiah, and we're still rejecting him to this day.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, do you have any thoughts about the Noahide laws and people that are saying that that's going to be the tribulation is going to be we're going to be all put under these Noahide laws that President Bush signed up and all of that, and then there's truth in all of that, but where does it, how far does this go? And I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but I get quite a lot of that.
Well, I would say this, that the Noahide laws that are discussed today is primarily a Jewish rabbinic invention, because for them, they recognize that the law, and I wouldn't even disagree with this. If you look in the Old Testament, Malachi 4:4, Deuteronomy 4, 7 and 8, Psalm 147, you have all these passages that make reference that the law of Moses, the 613 commandments that were given to Moses, were given to Israel. They weren't given to all the nations. God didn't say, go take this to Assyria. It wasn't. They were given to Israel. So what the Jews then developed was, well, what does God want for the rest of the non-Jew? Well, they created the Noahide laws, which, okay, that goes back again to Noah, who was non-Jewish. And they have their 10 commandments basically. And so I don't think that just because the Jewish rabbis created this doesn't mean it's necessarily biblical. I think that certainly there were commandments that were given in Genesis 9 to Noah for all of humanity that were in existence for all of ancient humanity up until the time of the cross, the time of the gospel. So at the time of the gospel, I was just there last week. I was in Athens. I was on Mars Hill, which is right next to the Acropolis. And here you have Paul in Acts 17. He's talking to these Gentiles, these Stoics and these Epicureans and these philosophers and these Athenians. And he says, listen, you have an altar over here to the unknown God, and I'm going to share him with you. And he talks about him being a creator, and he goes on and on. He says, but these times of ignorance, God has overlooked to a certain degree. But now, Acts 17, verse 30, he commands all men everywhere to repent and to put their faith and trust in Jesus, whom he's going to then judge. So at the time of that moment, from the cross onwards, all of humanity, including the Jews, they have to repent and put their faith and trust in the one whom is going to judge the world, which is Jesus the Messiah. So the Noahide laws are no longer relevant. The gospel is what's relevant. So when the rabbis come and say this, they're doing it in the context of rejecting Jesus and his work. Yeah. So in my mind, when people talk about these things during the tribulation period, no. What does it take in the tribulation to be saved? It takes the gospel of Jesus. That's the only way to be saved is through him. And what do we have? You're going to have the two witnesses during the tribulation. You're going to have others that get saved, either, depending on somebody's perspective, either the church will be there, or if the church raptured out, it doesn't matter. You're going to have believers during the tribulation who are saved. You're going to have the 144,000 Jews in Revelation 7 who are saved. They're not going to be preaching Noah. They're going to be preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to the Jews and to the whole world. So when the angel in Revelation 14, basically 6 through 8, goes through with the eternal gospel, the eternal good news, talking about fearing God and giving him worship, this ultimately is rooted in the gospel that Jesus did.
Sounds good, yes. So another question, that comes up a lot, I suppose, is people saying this is the current state of Israel. It's just all a Rothschild's creation. It's the international bankers, and they want the land for themselves, and it's the Luciferians and all of that. And yes, the Rothschilds did have a big part to play. You can't deny that that they did have a big role to play in the setting up of the state of Israel, But that doesn't nullify to me that God had a plan. He can even use wicked people to bring his plan to pass.
He uses wicked people all the time. I mean, all you got to do is, read the Old Testament that he used Assyria to judge northern Israel. Isaiah 10, he calls Assyria my servant. And he used Nebuchadnezzar to judge Judah. And so there's no doubt that God uses wicked people all the time to accomplish his sovereign purposes. So I would say the same thing, that if you look, I would agree with that statement to a degree, that I would say it this way. People that say that the Rothschilds or whatever international secular satanic Luciferians were involved, I would say my question is, what's your ultimate point? Is your ultimate point that somehow delegitimizes the people that are there as not being a miracle or being in the sovereign plan of God? If that's what you're saying, I disagree. But if you're simply saying that God uses these wicked people, these socialists, many of them were atheists. David Ben-Gurion, these guys were agnostic and secularists. So if you're simply saying that there were secularists and atheists and others that did not worship the God of Israel established in the state, I agree, of course. That's a fact of history. But if you're making the point that God can't use wicked people to accomplish his purposes, I would disagree with that for biblical reasons. And so that's really the important thing, is to have a balanced perspective on all this, because some people, they run and they go, well, if the Rothschilds are involved, that means God's not involved. Whoa, where'd you get that idea?
Yeah.
That's again, I just gave several examples. I mean, in Acts chapter 4, we see that God used Herod, the Jews, the Gentiles, and the Romans to kill Jesus. So, but we know God predestined it. That's what Acts 4:27-28 says. But he used wicked four separate groups or demographics to accomplish his purpose. Isaiah 53:10 says that it pleased the Lord to crush him, this messianic figure. So no doubt God was involved, but he used wicked people to accomplish the greatest work of salvation history ever, which was the cross. So to think that God couldn't use wicked people, Rothschilds and others, to accomplish a miracle of modern Israel in order to get them to the point of being saved at the end, then I think people don't understand their biblical theology.
That's true. I agree. Another point that I get a lot of people at times saying, the whole what's going on in the world, this was all because Albert Pike foretold it in a letter, to Mazzini. I've basically debunked that. I did a few years ago an article and a video where I proved that there was never a 3 world wars letter. Albert Pike never wrote any such letter. It doesn't even appear until the 1950s, when we've already had the First World War, the Second World War, and the State of Israel is already in existence. So there never was an Albert Pike letter. And I think I've pretty much proved that in the article and the video I did. So that's another mute point that, gets thrown out a lot with what's going on today. So I don't know, with the war that's going on at the moment, obviously, and potentially to escalate, people can use that as this is all pre-planned because of that Albert Pike letter and so on and so forth. But yet something big is going on in the Middle East, and I don't know how far is this going to lead to World War III. What's it going to do? It's certainly looking pretty ominous at the moment, but I don't know what your thoughts are on the current situation with the wars. It
is so hard to, as any of us, it's so hard to predict where this current situation is going in Israel specifically. The other, because we have several factors. I mean, you on a different, maybe a separate shelf, is you have Russia with Ukraine. We don't know where that's going.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say there's a chance for World War to be precipitated would be based, if I was to make odds, which again, not a prophet.
Yeah.
I would think that World War III would come more out of the Russia-Ukraine situation than Israel. Even though because over there it's more isolated. We've seen Israel certainly take out Hamas. What Hamas did on October 7th was horrible. I mean, if anybody denies that, then they're anti-Semitic. They're anti-human. I mean, that was horrible. What happened? Cooking children in ovens and everything else.
There is people that are saying that a lot of the people that died on October the 7th was Israel's own forces coming in and indiscriminatly killing whom they thought was Hamas with helicopters and things, and they ended up killing about half of the people that died were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, I can't say whether that's true or false.
Yeah, and I've heard some of the rumors, but at the end of the day, hey, I'm open to anything if there's evidence. And what I haven't seen some real document evidence. And here's the reason I say that is, if you look at the response of the Israeli Defense Forces on that day, where there's 1,200 were killed, they were very slow to respond. And so most of the atrocities happened within a couple hours. And of course, the hostages were taken back inside Gaza before the IDF even showed up to kill anybody. And so I would question that. But again, I don't have all knowledge. But the fact of the matter is, what you do see, Israel's response is, there's no doubt that Hamas cannot rule Gaza. I mean, all the tunnels, instead of building nice beach houses for their people, they're building tunnels and war machines. They have received billions and billions and billions of dollars. I mean, honestly, Gaza, its location is beautiful. It's got beachfront. And that Hamas totally betrayed their people. And could have taken all that money. And as we've seen recently with all of these fat cats, these leaders, either they're living over in Qatar, they're worth billions of dollars. I mean, they're siphoning all this money while their own people are starving. They're using their people. They're putting these terrorist things in hospitals. I mean, it's just horrible. So what I see there with Israel going in and cleaning that up, and now, of course, cleaning up the north of Lebanon, I actually was surprised at how inept Hezbollah was. You know, people were talking about hundreds of thousands of missiles, and when they knew that Israel was coming in, why didn't they launch them 50,000 at the same time? They for whatever reason, we don't know, and obviously I'm glad they didn't, because for them, if anybody doesn't recognize that what we've seen for the most part, again, nobody knows everything, but Israel puts leaflets out. They do not specifically target civilians in the same way. Let's say that some people think they do. Okay. Well, I would say, are you saying that they target civilians in the same way that Hamas or Hezbollah targets civilians? They're launching missiles randomly that are hitting, kids at schools, everything else, where at least Israel has shown itself to be very precise. I mean, like, look at what happened in Iran or Beirut. They're taking out these floors. So it's very precise. They're not just carpet bombing, which again is a tactic of war, which is exactly what Hamas, they're carpet missiling, if you wanted to say it that way. So all that being said, where's this going? Well, it'll be interesting to see. This is where there's one open-ended puzzle here. When Israel retaliates for the latest 200 missiles sent by Iran, of course, they sent them back in April and they sent them just a few weeks ago. When Israel responds to that event, that'll be interesting, whether it escalates or, as we saw last time. Remember when in April, when Iran sent the missiles, Israel had a very isolated response, and then Iran just kind of faded. I was like, I thought this was going to explode, and it didn't. So who knows what Israel's going to do this time? But could it fade away again? They're going to do a ground invasion, because as we know, I have some friends who are Israeli reservists, and they're being called up. Like, they were here in America and they're being called up. So they are going back to go into a ground invasion into Lebanon. So
the one problem I have with it is, and you hear Netanyahu talking about how we're going to win this war, and basically, but you can't blast an ideology away. You can kill Sinwar and you can kill this one and that one, but that isn't going to stop the ideology. So it's like this. How long is a piece of string? You get you kill this one, and then the next one steps up, and all it does is it's not going to make friends out of the people. They're not going to be thinking, as their homes are destroyed and everything around them, it's like they're not going to be thank you, Israel, this is just what we were hoping for. So all it's going to do is escalate more and more hatred too. So I just can't see how this ends well, put it that way.
Agreed. 100% agreed. I don't think that I don't think there's ever going to be just everybody's going to be getting along, peace in the Middle East, in the sense, all the way until the end. There's wars are determined. Yeah. It is interesting to me that when Nasrallah was killed, the leader of Hezbollah, that there were lots of people in Syria passing out candies. They loved it. They loved Israel for it, because they hate Hezbollah. Yeah. So even the Muslims, with the Shiites and the Sunnis despise one another. But there's no doubt what you see in the land. What does the rebuilding look like in Gaza? I mean, with billions of dollars, are they ever gonna be like, hey, they're gonna build their beachfront properties? Highly doubtful. Yeah. Because why? A generation of young people in the very schools, as you said, are trained in this ideology. It is not going. This is one of the things that they've talked about, is that when whoever is going to come and rule in Gaza, which will not be Hamas, that they have to start with a new educational system, Because if you don't change that, which again, this is now part of talking about how do you eradicate an entire religion? You can't. That's why I don't see that changing. There's always going to be radicals. I would say this though, there is an interesting element if you put in Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries, they're more economic than they are religious, no doubt, but they have their own economic reasons. And so they don't care about the Palestinians. That Salman from Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, is like, listen, we don't really care about the Palestinian issue. That Hamas has caused this is their problem. They voted these people in, and then they turn around and wonder why their leadership betrayed them. So they don't really care about that. So it is possible that if there was some sort of Abrahamic Accords, that maybe Saudi Arabia or some other group would come in order to manage or to rule in a way, which I find that you're talking about Shiites and Sunnis. That's going to be highly problematic. Are these Shiites going to want Saudi Arabia coming in? They're aligned with Iran, which Iran and Saudi Arabia are sworn enemies. So there, peace in our time. This is going to be it's a forced neutrality based on Israel's greater force that they have in order just to subjugate it. But I think you said it right. Will the people in Gaza come out in support of Israel and say this is wonderful? I doubt it.
Not when it's been half destroyed.
Exactly. I can't see it either.
But there's that picture of Sinwar with the little toddler with the AK-47 or whatever it is. I mean, that just shows you,
he's a coward. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, and there's a kid holding, but that's training these little kids from that size to hate and use guns, and then people go that these are the oppressed people. I mean, any other country, Western country, you wouldn't bring up your children like that. No. And so people that are in support of that and supporting Hamas and all that, to me, it's just really out there. You got to really examine who they are and what are they really teaching, and what are they, how are they raising their population? So something. I don't know. Like I said, I can't see an ideology being wiped out by force. It doesn't matter how much Israel bombs and goes in there and destroys this one and takes out that leader. That's not going to destroy the ideology. It has to be something from within the people that would want to go, we've had a guts full of these, and like Hamas and Hezbollah and all that. That's the only way it can really be turned around, not by another country like Israel coming in and destroying this person in that bunker, and it won't end. So anyone that thinks it's just going to end because they put the heaviest boot down, I don't see that happening. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents worth on it. But having said that, even though I don't necessarily agree with how Israel's handling things, I still believe in, Israel being in the land and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that really, it comes down to that recognition of God's promises. Yeah. And he, again, even God himself was I mean, anybody has to just read the Old Testament, read the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. God was very displeased with his people most of the time. And he, read the book of Judges. He sends oppressors to bring them back to himself because they were unrighteous and they themselves were not following what God commanded. And so there were no good kings in the north, in the northern kingdom and at all. And there were a handful in the south. So the fact of the matter is most of the Old Testament was God trying to reach his people because of that. And so in the same way, what we see is we're living in biblical times in that God's desire is going to reach his people spiritually through their Messiah, Jesus. But at the same time, what we're seeing, I find it interesting that every development here is right now, I ask the question, who or what does Israel trust in for their existential survival, their security? They trust in themselves. They're not trusting in the God of Israel. Yeah. They're not giving him praise, even though I think he is certainly keeping them around. But he's keeping them around for his own namesake, as you mentioned in Ezekiel 38. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for my own name. So as long as we keep a balanced approach, we can navigate these waters, these of extremes, and say, listen, let's keep it balanced. And I think there's enough scriptural information to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, so if as we look to close up, firstly, can you tell people where they find you online, and then just give me any closing thoughts or anything that you want to add that we haven't covered?
Yeah, they can find all of our work at prophecywatchers.com. And I mean, there's so much going on in all of this prophetically. Of course, we see Israel as being one little cog in all of the wheel of what we understand as the prophetic convergences that are happening in our world. The world is going to globalism. The world's going to digital currency. The world's going to immorality. I mean, the world's going to tyranny and control and loss of liberties and polarization and civil war. We see all these things, which are exactly what the Bible says are going to happen. And then when you look at Israel, Israel's one part of that. And then even under that, I mean, all the stuff that's happening, I've talked about the red heifer and the third temple and all these things that are in motion. You can't make this stuff up. It's pretty amazing when we see all this, that we're approaching the end of the age. I'm not saying it's next week, but we're past the point of no return. We're not going back to this wonderful, land of Mayberry, Wizard of Oz, all peace and harmony. It's just not going to happen. So I think at the end of the day, when we talk about these things, the ultimate goal is just to help people understand, help people think biblically, but also to help people that are maybe on the fence or not understanding what's going on. We want to warn them. Jesus himself said, this day of trouble, this day of judgment, this day of testing is going to come upon a world that is unaware. It's going to come upon them like a trap. And he says to them, you need to pray. You need to be in a position that you'll be able to escape all these things in Luke 21:36 and to stand before the Son of Man. So whatever that looks like, at the end of the day, the safety is found not in a specific view of eschatology, pre-trib, pre-wrath. That's not even what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the idea of being found in Jesus Christ. That's the key. If you're in him, then certainly there's safety there. There's comfort, not only for eternity, or I could die today, but also that we will be ready so that this day would not surprise us, this day of judgment that's coming.
Sounds great. Awesome. That's a very balanced point of view, and I like it. So thank you for being on the show. And look, we'll have to do it again soon, Mondo.
Always here. Anytime.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And folks, remember, our website is aminutetomidnight.com. Please make sure you subscribe to us there. And we have BitChute, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube channels. But primarily our website, aminutetomidnight.com, is where we post everything. And we do run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. It's always greatly appreciated, the people that help us, so thank you very much. And if anyone else does want to donate, you can do that at aminutetomidnight.com. So God bless, and God willing, we'll be back in a few days with another episode.